Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the NAUMD 2021 webinar series. I'm Rick Levine, Director of Development here at the NAUMD. On the panel, you also see Steve Zalkin, President of the NAUMD, and Len Greenfield, our presenter today, who's from qUniform. We are so pleased with the response to this webinar, certainly a topic of interest to us all who are busy out there selling uniform programs and looking for the best ways in which to close those deals, RFPs, RFQs, tenders, all of that good stuff. Len's an expert at, and he's going to enlighten us today on a whole bunch of things. Welcome, Len, and I'm gonna also talk for one more minute here about some NAUMD activities, and then we'll turn it over to you, Len. Sound fair?
Sure.
Okay, so the NAUMD is very excited. We have this webinar series this year. We have 20 slots. We're going to be presenting the first and third Thursdays of each month. So please watch your inbox for information. We announce it on all our social channels. We send out the Pulse every Tuesday. So please be sure that you're getting your free copy of the Pulse each week to your inbox. You can opt in on our website. We also send out to members only each month, the Insider, another email publication. We have our annual awards. We're going to be starting a podcast in another month or two, so please watch out for that. We're busy recording the initial interviews now, and we'll be releasing that soon. Take a look at all of our products and services at the naumd.com website. And lastly, our annual show, due to pandemic, of course, like everyone else, we have pushed it back further in the year. Some joke that they will not be going home come August. There'll be so many trade shows here in North America from August through the end of the year. So the NAUMD is no exception. We've moved our show to October 24 to the 26th. It's at the lovely Paradise Point in San Diego, California. We invite you all to attend that show, exhibit at that show, walk that show, think about that show, live that show. You get the idea. So Len, I am very excited to hear your presentation today. Personally speaking, I've known of qUniform for a number of years now. Your customers speak very highly of you, and we are of particular eagerness to learn about your experience in the RFP tender area and the advice that you can give us all on how best to approach that. And how to win more, I guess, right, Len?
Absolutely, that's the goal.
Excellent. So I am going to be quiet now, Len, and turn it over to you.
All right, so let me just pull my screen up here. Very good. So you shall be able to see my screen right now. I just want to make sure that that's the case.
We can. And actually, Len, one last thing is I'll be monitoring the Q&A and the chat. So if you did want to ask a question midstream to Len, I'll be monitoring that. But then also, Len, I believe you're allowing questions at the end. So there you go.
Exactly. All right. So welcome, everybody. Let me quickly go through, and in fact, we have a lot of material to cover today. I could actually discuss this for many hours. So we're really going to squish this in as best as we can and move rapidly through. So at the end, as Rick said, at the end, there is certainly going to be an opportunity for some Q&A. And since this seminar is being recorded, if I happen to go through something a little bit quickly, that's okay. You'll be able to go back and reference that and click on pause and see whatever's on the screen. So don't worry if something goes by a little quickly. So today, we're going to be dealing with a few important things. One of them is, first, the strategies to becoming a finalist on any RFP or tender. That is the largest focus of what we're going to be talking about today. So it's not specifically oriented at allotments. That's going to be the second part of what we're dealing with today, is how can you increase revenues by using allotments and allotment-based RFPs and contracts. So we're going to take a little bit of a look in that. And then we're going to see if we can squeeze in 10 minutes worth of questions at the end. So let me just give you a very quick synopsis of my entire life. I am the co-owner of Symbolic Technologies. We are B2B e-commerce specialists, have been for about 20 years. For more than 35 years, I've been a business analyst and a software developer. And I have more than 20 years of experience in dealing with the uniform industry, and specifically through our application qUniform. Our company, Symbolic, as I mentioned, we are B2B e-commerce specialists. We really focus on data and moving things from your internal systems to your external, to a website, taking an order, moving that in. That's what we do. But again, we've been really focused on the uniform industry specifically for almost 20 years in all of these various areas. So now that actually I know a whole bunch, or sorry, now that you know a whole bunch about me, I'd actually like to know a little bit more about you. So I popped up a series of questions that I'm just going to ask you to take a few seconds and answer, so that I can get a much better handle on the level of expertise and the level of experience that you have with RFPs and with allotments. Okay, so we'll let this go for just another 15, 20 seconds. Okay, so just go through and select your results, select your options. And all right, we'll give it another 15 seconds. All right. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up the polling now. So last chance to click. All right, perfect. Okay, so just we'll look at this all together. So what we see here is that the majority of you have certainly dealt with RFPs in the past, and you consider yourselves to be relatively expert or certainly comfortable. And there are some of you who are much less comfortable. And so I'm going to try to address both ends of that spectrum today. Those of you who have a lot of experience, hopefully you'll just pick up a couple of tips. I may present some methodologies that you may not have used in the past. Okay, and in general, if we take a look at the second question, so result-wise, a lot of you who are here have had some positive experiences responding to RFPs, which is great. But with respect to allotments, it looks like that there is certainly some room for explanations and some knowledge. And so we'll adapt and we'll focus on all of that. All right, so let's move along. Those are the three questions that we asked. Let's get right into the subject material, and let's first start by defining a few terms. Often when I speak to people, they aren't actually certain what the difference between an RFP, an RFQ, a tender, where does it start and end? And the differences are important because they affect the way that you're going to approach your answers. So first of all, a tender is a situation where the customer knows what they want, or at least they think they know what they want. But really what they're looking for is the right provider, the right supplier to provide them with what they want. So the tender experience is about choosing the partner. An RFQ, or request for quote, is really about price. It means they know exactly what they want this specification, and they are just shopping for price. Nothing else is going to matter in an RFQ. And so when you get an RFQ, don't think that, well, I'm going to be able to finesse them into providing more value. In general, with an RFQ, it's closed. And then, of course, we have an RFP, request for proposal. And in an RFP, here the customer has a need. They have expressed their need, and they may even go through, as they would have in the tender, with what they believe their preferred solution might look like. But because it's a request for proposal, they are open to suggestions. And that's your opportunity to try to differentiate yourself from your competitors and provide them with the story of why they'd be better off dealing with you than with anybody else. So in today's session, we're really going to focus on RFPs and tenders. We're not going to talk about RFQs because that's really just about price. So first of all, having an effective RFP or tender strategy is the key to being selected as a finalist and winning those contracts. So again, what I'm talking about isn't just responding, it's having a strategy towards responding. So every prospective customer wants to know the same things, whether it's through an RFP or tender, or just someone that you were invited to have a conversation with. They want to know, number one, you are organized and you have a plan. Number two, they will get extra value by dealing with you. And number three, that you have so much insight that you can answer the questions that they know they should have asked, but that they didn't ask. And all three of those are really important in being selected to be a finalist in an RFP. All you need to do in the RFP is communicate that. And that, of course, is the big challenge. And so we're going to look at some of the strategies towards achieving that. So one of the problems that everybody talks about all the time is how much work it is to respond to an RFP. And you will often ask yourself, is it worth the effort that I'm going to make? And so hopefully I'm going to give you some tools that you can use so that you can make sure that you're not wasting your time. It's not true that you should respond to every RFP. Rather, you need to evaluate the RFPs in order to figure out which ones you should and how you should respond. So let's talk a little bit about the strategy of the response. Okay, so first of all, when you get your RFP or tender document, the very first thing you do is open it. You don't put it aside and say, I'm going to look at this tomorrow. You look at it immediately. And the very first thing that you look at is the page that has all of the deadlines on it. This is the date for the deadline for questions, and then this is the deadline for indicating that you want to respond, and this is the deadline for responding. The first thing you need to know is what all of those dates are. The next thing that you should do, and okay, I accept that you may not necessarily drop everything and read it thoroughly, but you do need to do that thorough read within 24 hours of getting your RFP. And the reason for it, of course, is because there may be questions and requirements that may take most of the time between the time that you're reading it and the time that you have to submit it together. You may need to get quotes for certain aspects. If any of you are currently importing, manufacturing overseas and importing, you know that, that right now, shipping is completely upside down, and getting quotes and getting timelines is very difficult and takes weeks for you to get a response. So you need to read it right away, look at all of those questions. You need to make notes. It's not enough to read and make a mental note. The mental note is great, but if you're old like me, tomorrow you're going to forget about that mental note. You need to make notes directly in that document. And so you should take, usually today we receive RFPs as one or a series of PDFs. You should take that PDF and make it, put it in a shareable place where people can collaborate and make comments. You're going to make your comments directly in that document so that the next time you read it or one of your team members reads it, they're going to be able to collaborate and see what your considerations were. You're going to immediately highlight areas of any confusion. And the reason that you're doing this on the very, very first pass is that the first time that you read a document, what happens is things jump out of the page to you. It's during that first review of it that you read something and say, that might be a problem for me. The second time that you read it, you've already emotionally dealt with that challenge. And so when you read it the second time, it's not going to jump off of the page. If you have a question, if you have a concern as you're reading it, you make that note on the very, very first pass. This is super important. And I don't know if all of you know what a SWOT analysis is. And if you don't worry, I'm going to describe that in a minute or two in much more detail. But you should be using a SWOT analysis as you go through your RFP or tender document. That's what's going to help highlight what are your strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And for those that don't know what a SWOT analysis is, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. You know that you usually have an opportunity to ask questions of the prospective customer, and you need to take advantage of that. Many people are hesitant to ask questions because they think that, well, it might show that I don't understand everything, or even worse, that, oh, I'm going to ask a question and it's going to show my competitors what I'm thinking and give them insight into my response. Let me tell you, if your competitors, if they're really competitors of yours, they're already thinking the way that you're thinking. And so sharing the question isn't going to change the strength of their response. What it's going to do is change the strength of your response. And that should be your only concern when you're evaluating your RFP document. Okay, so we talked very quickly about SWOT, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Often it's presented this way as a 4-box grid. It could simply be, when you're doing your SWOT analysis, it could be a table with 4 rows in a Word document for, 1 row for strengths, 1 row for weaknesses. It's any format that you want, but you're going to slot into these areas the notes that you're recognizing and making during reading that document. So the very first issue is every requirement that is a strength of yours goes under S. So as you're reading and you go, oh yeah, I've got that. Oh yeah, I've got that. It's not enough to say I've got it. You make a note that says I've got it. And the reason we'll see a little bit later on when we summarize how it is that we present all of this information. Every requirement that your company is going to have trouble with goes under weakness. So again, as you're reading it and you look at something and say, oh, that we're not great at that, you mark it down as weakness because you want to address it one way or another within your response. Every time you have a thought about extra services that you could provide or about the advantages of dealing with you with respect to what that prospective customer is asking for, that's an opportunity. Conversely, everything that your competitors are going to be really good at, those are threats. And if you take a look and let me just, if you take a look here, okay, you have internal and external. So as you're going through, when you're reading the document, anything that has to do with the way your company runs and advantages or disadvantages of your company, that's a strength or weakness. Anything that is environmental, that's outside of your company, that is an opportunity or a threat. Okay, so let's quickly look at some qualifying questions that you might want to ask yourself when you're looking at an RFP document. And what I mean by qualifying is we're not talking about them qualifying you. We're talking about you qualifying this opportunity. Do you want to spend the time? Remember that graphic a couple of slides ago about, are we going to invest all of this time into addressing this specific RFP? So in this case, there's a lot of information on the slide. I'm going to just pick and choose and go through it very quickly. But the first question to ask yourself, is this something that we can win? is this in our wheelhouse? Is this really for us? There's no reason to respond if this isn't for you, or if you think, I really can't win. And there are ways, and we're going to talk about some issues to be able to ask that question and figure out if you can or you can't. And is the contract too big? Are you too small a company? Are you not ready for it yet? Are there too many other bidders? Is this really a commodity type RFP where all you're really doing is providing exactly the same service as everybody else? Well, you know, if you have an edge, great. If you don't, are you really wasting your time doing that? Okay, excuse me. So let's take a look at how do we break down the tender or bid document to understand how they evaluate us. Now, in most tenders, not necessarily in RFPs, although you sometimes get that, they have, before issuing the document, established a scoring mechanism. And when you're looking at a scoring mechanism, keep in mind that they are going to try to take all of the responses and be able to compare apples to apples. So here I've broken it down into, let's say, 3 sections: administrative, product, and operational. And as you can see in the chart that I have here, if you look at vendor C on the administrative is really poor, but in the operational, they're really good. And as a result of that, they end up having the highest score, even though they failed in the administrative area. So it really is about score in the end. And that means you need to look at the RFP and know how they're scoring. If they don't give you a scoring grid within the RFP, you can ask for one. Now, that doesn't mean that they'll provide it. If they provide it to you, they provide it to everybody. And it doesn't mean that they have it or want to share it. But if you don't see it, you can ask for it. Okay, so let's take a bit of a closer look now. I just boiled it down to these 3 sections. And in these 3 sections, it's quite likely in specific situations that they could break these down into 6 or 7 different areas. But just for simplicity, so we have the administrative area. So the administrative area is all about providing documents, your financials, an insurance certificate, how many years have you been in business. You can't change any of that, but you can sell your strengths. And what I mean by that is, if you take a look at national versus local or number of employees, just keep in mind that it's not interpreted the same way by every prospective customer. In some cases, the fact that you're a national or international organization is a benefit. It means that you're solid, you'll be around one way or another, you'll be able to fulfill the contract. But on the other side of things, you know, prospective customers may look at it and say, well, if I'm one of 1,000 or 5,000 customers, then how much attention am I really going to get? Versus if I'm the customer of a smaller organization, I'm going to get that concierge service. And that's why, you know, even though it's something you can't control, look at it in context. The product. So certainly there's nothing that I can contribute today to dealing with product. The only thing that I want to point out to you is, don't assume that the entire RFP is going to be awarded because you've provided the best product or you've provided the best price. It's not. All of these sections together are what make the difference. So if you're planning to spend 90% of your effort in responding to the RFP focusing on product, and product is only worth 40% of the RFP, you are misplacing your effort in responding. Okay, now you do need to make a good response, but just don't lose track of the other areas. Okay, what I call operational is everything else: customer service, the migration of this customer from whoever they were dealing with before, that incumbent, and you, that whole process. Now, keep in mind that that it's very likely that the group of people who are going to evaluate the responses to the RFP, they're likely part of the group that currently administers that qUniform program. The items that are in section 3, that's what they deal with every day. They don't deal with what's the quality of the fabric of the jacket. They're not interested in that. They're interested in how efficient is the fulfillment process. What's the shipping and pickup situation? These are the things that they want to know about. And that's true regardless of scoring. Now, if the objective is to become a finalist in presenting, in getting an opportunity to present in a live format to this panel, your proposal, then you want to score as highly as you can, and you're going to score highly if you get that panel of administrators to just to see that you're taking their considerations into giving that great weight. And just one minor note here, I just want to point out the ability to integrate with the customer's systems. That's an opportunity for a long-term relationship. If, as an example, you integrate with their human resource system so that when an employee gets hired, automatically they end up within your online portal already registered and set up with all of their rules, that creates an opportunity for long-term relationship. Okay, so response strategy, the goal, as I just said, the goal is get on the short list, get selected to make your presentation. And how you do that is by making your offer what I call intriguing. And that simply means you're going to introduce an option, an additional thought, thinking outside of the box that hopefully no one else has suggested, enough so that they're interested in getting you into that group of finalists so that you can explain to them that situation. So let me just relate a very quick story. Is going back maybe 10 years ago, there was an RFP that our company was responding to, and it was for a very large contract, and they had hired a consultant, a specialist, to prepare their RFP. And I read the RFP document that the consultant had prepared and completely disagreed with the approach that the consultant suggested. So I asked only one question during that period of questions, which is, are you open to considering an alternative solution? And the response came back, yes, we're open. So I presented a proposal that was completely different than what they were asking for and was likely a little bit more expensive than what they were asking for. But it got me invited to the presentation, because the only way that they could then evaluate that was their ability and the consultant's ability to challenge me on all of those extra assumptions. And we did, in the end, win that RFP. We got the contract. It lasted for many years until the project was complete, and that entire project was not at all what they had envisioned. It ended up being incredibly successful, I think. And so I just relay that as you never know what it is that's going to get you that spot in the finalists, but more often than not, it's the thinking outside of the box and the extra suggestions. So in order to get onto that list, again, you need to either answer yes to every question so that you just, you hit all the scoring points, or you need to provide an explanation of why an alternative is going to be better. And again, keep in mind, it is not about price, it's about score. You need to look at that breakdown, and if you don't have a breakdown, you need to look at the questions that they're asking and then figure out for yourself how you do that. So here's another page with a lot of information. I'm going to skip over most of this, but These are questions that you need to ask yourselves before you submit your RFP. So once you've got your outline of the RFP, you need to sit down and ask yourself, have I accomplished these aspects? Now, so first of all, in order to be efficient at responding to RFPs, you really need to create a library of responses, because very often the components are the same. But be careful during your cut and paste that you don't paste an answer in that is inappropriate. You really need to take the time to go through it. Make sure you're concise and clear in answering the questions. When you reread your response, or better yet, have someone else on your team read your response and make sure that it makes sense. Tell the truth. There's no point in telling them that you're in the process of becoming ISO 9001 certified if you're not in the process of becoming ISO 9001 certified. Tell them that you're, if that's an issue for you, tell them that you're not, but that you are willing to undertake this for them if that's a requirement. But don't tell them that you're in the process. They know you're not in the process. They know that everybody who says we are in the process of doing this is not. Okay, be innovative. Make sure you have a clickable table of contents if you're giving them a PDF. You can read through the rest of this list. Okay, so we've talked so far about the RFP process in general, and hopefully I've given you a few tips, and there's more coming as to how you can take a method. Hard word for me today. How you can methodically go through your RFP document in order to come up with your response, how you can qualify that RFP. So now it comes up to the next part of what we're talking about today, which is, and so what does all of this have to do with allotments, and where, and how can you use allotments within the context of RFP to generate revenue and keep the client longer? So how does it fit in? Well, we all understand that customers are becoming much more sophisticated in their RFP and tender requests. There's no doubt about that. It was acceptable in the past that that they would simply deal with, well, that's actually the next 2 points. It would be acceptable that they would deal with your limitations as a supplier. Well, we can't really administer that complicated a program. We're really good at managing budgets. Well, today, if that's not what the prospective customer needs, then you're out of the running, because they are really looking for that level of service. And point number 2 here, collective agreements require more complex allotment rules. Well, that's really critical, and that's a big part of where the complexity of allotments come in. So briefly, here's another slide with lots and lots of words. We're not going to go through all of these, but I will read a couple of them. So when we're talking about allotments, we're talking about not just budgets or points, but it could be unit allotments where you're allowed 2 shirts and 1 pair of pants every year, or it could be anniversary based where it's 1 coat every 3 years. There could be limits within a category where it's $200 for any kind of footwear and $400 to spend on everything else. So it's these combinations of complex rules that really make the difference. Now, yes, this should really just look like a word salad at this point when you're looking at all of those different aspects. And the idea behind it is that it is necessarily complex. If it was simple, the client could manage it themselves. The reason that they want you to manage it is because it isn't simple. And that's the revenue opportunity. So let's take a quick look at some common allotment structures, okay, some of the aspects. So we talked just a moment before, there's budgets, points, units, categories, and often these are mixed together. This is what I was just talking about. There can also be different types of calendars. So it could be that the budget runs annually and every January 1st it renews. There might be carry forwards of values from the previous period, from the previous 2 periods. Or it could be that each employee has a renewal date on their own. Or it could be that each unit within the employee's allotment has a renewal date. That's a situation like you're allowed 1 coat every 3 years, and you're allowed 1 suit jacket every 2 years, and 2 pairs of pants every 1 year. That's that concept of every unit has its own renewal date. So a typical allotment structure, let's look at one for an airline flight attendant, might be, and this is one that I was mostly describing, right? 1 coat every year, 1 sweater or a vest or a cardigan every 2 years. So what we're talking about there is that every 2 years, they're allowed 1 item from a category of 3 types of items, and 2 pairs of pants every year, and 2 ties from a number of different colors every 2 years. And then in addition, they are allowed to select either 2 extra pairs of pants or 1 jacket or 1 extra vest. So you can see how this can become very complicated. It's not that it's impossible to keep track of in an Excel spreadsheet, but imagine that you're doing it for a company with 10,000 uniformed employees. Then it's frankly impossible to implement rule restrictions to make sure that someone has not ordered something that they are not allowed to order today. Let's take a look at a not so typical allotment structure. So in this case, it's a municipal transit driver. They might have an annual point balance, and they're allowed to carry over unused portions. As part of their points, they're allowed to buy an outdoor coat. But the outdoor coat is the most expensive item on their listing, and very often they have to order that coat in the very first year that they're an employee, and that might cause them to go over their point limit. And because of that, they're granted the ability to exceed their point limit. So now let's say that they're given 300 points, except if they order a winter coat, now they're allowed 500 points. But then in the following year, because they exceeded their 300 by 200 points, those 200 are deducted from the following year. Doesn't matter whether you follow that logic or not. That's the logic of their rules. That's what they're telling you needs to be implemented. And if you're going to get their business, you need to be able to manage that. And so it begs an interesting question, which is, so why do allotment rules get so complicated? And the answer is this. What happens is, if you're dealing with a prospective customer or a customer, especially one that has thousands of employees, but this is even true with customers that have a few hundred employees, their employees may be part of a collective bargaining agreement. And the way that collective bargaining agreements are processed is that they're incrementally changed. Every time they sit down to negotiate, they don't reopen everything like a business person would do, right? And sit down and figure out how should we do this so that it's efficient for everybody? That's not how it's done. The union has the objective of getting something more. So they ask for, well, I'd like an extra $50 to be able to spend on this. And at the end of the negotiation, now you're told, oh yeah, in addition to all of the rules that already existed, now we have to fit in this additional thing. And it's not just an extra $50 on their allotment, it's an extra $50 on a subsection of their allotment, maybe every 2 years. And so in order to satisfy their collective bargaining agreement, you need to be able to provide that. So if it sounds like this picture looks, Well, that's true. And you're probably asking yourself, well, but isn't complexity bad? Isn't this something that we try to avoid? And the answer is, well, usually yes, but the more complex an allotment program is, the more difficult it is for that client to switch providers in the future. And so that is an opportunity for you to own the client longer by doing allotment management. So now that should be ringing bells for those of you who haven't done this before, saying, okay, so really what we're saying here is that if I can get my customer, prospective or existing customer, to adjust the way that they allocate their uniform components to be more complicated and reflect maybe the way that it is that they're used, and meet the guidelines of the collective bargaining agreement. If you can get them to rethink, then you're a difficult incumbent to get rid of. You have their data, you have their rules, you've integrated with their human resource system. All of a sudden, you're more than just a supplier, you're a business partner. Now, some of the impacts of collective agreements that impact you, you need to realize when you're looking at an RFP that has any type of collective bargaining agreement behind it, what is the most important aspect for those administrators? Avoid employee grievances. And what's the employee's objective? File a grievance. Find the reason to file a grievance. What's the grievance? I got my shirt and it was a ½ an inch too long on the sleeves. Grievance filed. Okay. So your whole process of managing their operations. Remember when we were looking at those Venn diagrams that went together, and I was saying the operation, that area number 3, that operations is of critical importance to the administrators. That's because that's what determines, after they've selected what uniform components they're going to have, then if it's a 3-year or a 4-year contract, they're living with that uniform selection. And now they're living with you as the supplier, providing the service and providing the logistics of shipping, pickup, taking the orders, dealing with returns, doing alterations, etc. Keep in mind that when you're looking at an RFP that deals with collective bargaining agreements, that you may be required to provide a high level of performance, and that should be part of your costing. So if they must deliver a uniform in 48 hours, it's not that they should deliver in 48 hours, it's that if they don't deliver in 48 hours, the employee files a grievance. So now it becomes a requirement that you're stocking more SKUs than you otherwise would, because you can no longer deal with the, well, I'll plan for 90%, and in those 10% of cases, maybe it's going to take an extra day for me to get it from my supplier. No, that doesn't work here. You should, whenever you're dealing with a company that has a collective bargaining agreement, RFP or not, if you're a potential new supplier, you need to try to find out what was the experience before. Was it good or bad? What did they really like about what the incumbent provided? What did they really detest about what the incumbent provided? What were the obstacles? What were all of the problems? They will be, or they should be, happy to have that discussion with you. Okay, important safety tip. When you are responding to an RFP that has any kind of technology requirement associated with it, online reporting, special allotment rules management, specialized security requirements, you should be asking your technology provider to look at that section of the RFP. And it doesn't matter. I mean, okay, fine. You've responded to 50 RFPs, and now you're very familiar with what your application can and can't do. But in many of these specialized allotment management applications, there are hundreds of configurable rule sets. And as a result of that, you're necessarily, because of the nature of your business and the types of clients that you regularly service, you're going to be using a subset of the capabilities. So you should not assume, just because you've answered so many other RFPs, that that you know what your application can and can't do. Instead, ask your technology provider to give input. They should be happy to do that, because if you win the RFP, they're going to make more money, right? So absolutely, you should be asking them to participate in it with you. Now, some challenges. Most of you who have answered RFPs and tenders that have allotment management requirements will probably remember that in most of those, if not all of them, they don't actually even specify what the requirements are. Instead, they give you this ridiculous statement that says details will be provided, after we've issued the contract. Well, how are you supposed to know what it is that you're going to need to provide? Does your software provide that? Can you do that with a standard e-commerce store? Do you need to do something special? It is difficult to get this information from them if they haven't provided it, but ask for it. Ask for it every single time. Ask if they can just give you an example, even if often it's because they haven't figured out what changes they want to make. Ask them if they can give you an example of the previous allotment program, understanding that it might change. Even just that will give you some insight into their thinking, into what their process usually is. So when life gives you lemons, and in this case, I'm talking about they've asked you, they've given you an RFP and told you you need to manage their allotment program, and they've told you nothing about their allotment program, and you've asked the question, and they've still given you nothing about the allotment program. So the answer is you make lemonade. And how do you make RFP allotment lemonade? Well, you use your SWOT analysis. And this is one of the reasons, it's not the only, okay, it's one of the reasons why we do that SWOT analysis, so that we can go back and look at our strengths and our opportunities. And we see a strength that says, we have special allotment management software. And we see an opportunity that says, our competitors have only standard e-commerce stores. So that's an opportunity for me to tell them, we have a sophisticated online ordering system that can manage employee allotment programs with budgets, units, categories, et cetera, et cetera. Even though they haven't asked about that, tell them. And if they have asked you to explain or describe your ordering process, this is often the way that they ask for it, is, can you please describe your online ordering system or your online checkout system? Make sure not just to include some screenshots and descriptions of what, how you can add to the cart and this and that. You really want to address all of those capabilities that you know that you have, that they haven't asked for, and introduce them as options. So it's not that we want you to work this way, it's that, we have these capabilities, and if this is something you are interested in, it's something that we can explore with you. So that is the way to deal with that, the fact that you don't know what the allotment management requirements are. So you do specify that, you do tell them what you can do, and if you have any serious limitations, that's the place to list them. Now, absolutely, you need to address your customers' concerns and hesitations head on. You've read that RFP document or the tender document, and you are able to read between the lines, or maybe you've extracted information during the question period, and you've been able to see that that this customer has great concerns over the transition, and they are right to have concerns. You know that every business owner and anyone who's been involved in change knows that change is scary and transition is painful, and a bad decision can haunt a career. And therefore, you need, as part of your response, to show them that you have a plan for that, that this isn't the first time that you're responding to an RFP. They're not the first customer that you have. You've done this before, you have a methodology, you have an approach. So you're going to explain how you're going to make their transition smooth. You're going to give a plan, step 1, step 2, step 3. This is what we're going to do. And you can present that plan as provisional. You can say, well, you haven't given us enough information to create a project plan or a transition plan, but here's an example of one that we did for a similar project or for a client that's similar to you. And here are the elements that we considered and the timelines associated. The better that you can describe the experience that they're going to have, the more comfortable they're going to be with you. A moment ago, I said it's absolutely critical, whether they ask you to or not, you should be giving them something visual to describe the platform that you're going to be giving them to order through. So you should give them some screenshots, 1 or 2 or 3 or 12, not 40, okay? Not more than 12, but absolutely give them screenshots as an example. If they are putting a lot of emphasis on an approval process, so then show them screenshots of the approval process so that they understand it. If there's a flow that you can describe, then draw a diagram to show them the flow. So in this case, this is, for example, for an airline. And here we can place orders a number of ways. And so this diagram says that any of these people over here can place an order either by going directly to the boutique, or by placing the order online and going to the boutique, or by calling a call center and going to the boutique. And in this case, that's where it ended. It was always pickup because they wanted to make sure, this was part of the proposals, they wanted to make sure that everything fit properly. And so they didn't want to ship everything. The part of the concierge service was, when you're coming to pick up your uniform, we want you to try it on and we want to make sure that everything fits well. Or provide them with a project plan, a Gantt chart. And again, it doesn't have to be the project plan for this project. It can be a project plan for something similar, but show them that you have a methodology, that you've thought it out. That's what they're really interested in here. Okay, so how do we sew this all together? And again, here I'm going to go through this quickly. There are some points on this slide that I haven't raised in the rest of this discussion. So you do want to, this isn't just a what have we learned so far. There are a couple of points here, so you might want to go back and take a look at this. But how do we become a finalist? Be organized, use SWOT, have a methodology, take notes, evaluate against the scoring grid, all those yummy things that we talked about. How do you delight your customer and keep them longer? Focus on operations. Once they've chosen the product, yes, you have to deliver the product, but the product is now no longer that important. Now that they've chosen the product, the rest of it is about delivery. Use technology. Keep in mind that complex allotment programs equals high barrier to switching incumbents later on. Allows you to own the client for longer. Integration allows you to own the client for longer. What's the value proposition for the customer? Hands-off rule implementation. They can eliminate the need to use approvals at the same level that they're accustomed to. They now can have confidence that the system will deal with all of the regular rules, and now approvals are only for exceptions. And finally, what's required in order to be able to manage this kind of data? There is no question. This requires a technology solution. You cannot effectively do this with spreadsheets. You need to have a solution, and you need to have the solution before you have the customer, because the customer is going to ask you to demonstrate it, and they're going to ask you a question that says, are you using this solution for other customers? Okay, now that's not 100% of the time. We certainly do demos with plenty of our prospective customers when they're trying to win business. So that does happen. Okay, before I wrap up, a shameless plug. Okay, I really have not talked at all about our allotment management software. So if you want to know more about qUniform and how it can help you build your RFP and allotment business and build revenue, visit our website, and by all means, schedule a demo. We'll be delighted to bring you through and talk about your particular issues in more detail. So I do have one more question for you. Hang on one second. There we go. Which is, how useful did you find today? So if you can all just take another few seconds, and while you're filling this out, we can actually go right into Q&A. So Rick, I don't know if there are questions.
Hey, Len, that was fantastic. I just have to say also, as someone who's done a fair number of webinars over the years, super impressive that you didn't pause and say a lot. So I just want to thank you, Len, for that. You're a very good speaker, Len. So my hat,
thank you, Rick.
my virtual uniform hat.
Thank you, Rick.
So interestingly, one question, you didn't really talk about it per se, and you don't really have the accent, but being from Canada, is the term allotment synonymous, interchangeable with an allowance program?
Yes, there are a number of ways, and country by country, and frankly, supplier by supplier refer to them differently. So an allotment, an allowance, an entitlement, which is generally the way that it's referred to in Europe, a uniform program, these are all the same things. The distinction that I've been really focusing on today is, while a simple uniform budget is also a uniform program or an allotment or an allowance, that typically a more complex allotment program in the context of what we're talking about is more than just a budget. It's specific units, it's subsections of limits, it's minimum order quantities and maximum order quantities, approvals under certain circumstances. That's the fundamental difference between them.
Yeah, so the terms may change, but it's pretty universal. If you have a set of employees and you have business rules associated with doling out the garments and accessories and equipment, that's what the challenge is, what often they're asking for in these proposals and or what you have to submit. If anybody has questions, you can put them in the chat. I have a few questions also though, Len.
Sure.
So you mentioned early on about the concept of having a PDF that the team can all make notes on at the same time. Do you have a recommended, solution or platform that you've seen customers use successfully for that?
In this case, I was really just talking about, Adobe Acrobat, and they have a platform where you can share and collaborate on a PDF. The idea is you don't want to have 4 different versions of the document printed out with everybody's handwritten notes on the 4 different printouts. You'd like to have a single place. If you don't have a way to collaborate on a PDF, then a Word document in a network share or online in the cloud somewhere is sufficient. Today, everybody's using, many people are using Office 365.
Okay.
Office 365 comes with OneDrive and or SharePoint and the ability to collaborate, use those tools. They're very, very powerful.
Excellent. And how much, so you spoke a lot about extra efforts that you can put into the response and sending materials. How do you know how much extra material to send versus just answering the questions that they've asked? What's the way to think about that?
Right. Well, one of the slides that I had was about qualifying the RFP, determining whether this is something that you want to invest your time in. And so the first thing to do is look through those questions and come to a conclusion as part of also, and sorry, I should explain, that goes hand in hand with the with your SWOT analysis. Those are just a list of specific questions that that you can use as you're reading the RFP to fill in your SWOT analysis. At the end of that, you should be able to sit back and say, do I have more strengths or weaknesses? Do I have more opportunities or threats? And if it's going to be too tall a hill to climb, well, then move on and take the next one. Doing a mediocre or poor job on an RFP, that's a waste of time. If you're going to respond to an RFP, do it because you believe you can win and because you believe you can deliver a fantastic result.
Yeah.
Also, if you are not selected, and I know that we're 2 minutes over, but if you happen to be selected, if you happen to not be selected as a finalist, in many cases, I won't say most, you can ask that prospective customer if they would grant you a 5-minute conversation to explain why you weren't selected.
Oh, that's a very
and that is an incredibly useful opportunity. The more times you can do that, that's what's going to get you to that finish line more often in the future.
Yeah, be a lifelong learner and ask for the info. So Len, an excellent question asked. So you dove into the airline experience or example, and we all know those programs are some of the most complicated out there in our special, crazy uniform world. But
sure.
Erie is asking what if it's a lot more simple? What if they have a department and they just give them $1,000 a year to spend, and that's the only thing you need to keep track of, for example? If it's super simple, does your platform lend itself for that type of setup?
Oh, absolutely. That is very straightforward. And the issue of whether you need a platform or can do it in an Excel spreadsheet is, if they only have $1,000 to spend and they can spend it on whatever components it is that they want, that's great. You could do that in an Excel spreadsheet, maybe if there's 1,000 employees. But if there's 15,000 employees, no, you can't.
Right. No, he's asking if your software, you can be simple about the approach in the software, and then of course wants to know if the pricing would be different, Len, if you're doing something simple versus doing something complex.
So within the context of this webinar, which is not really about our particular platform, I would invite them to book a demo and let's talk about the specifics of it. But just because the question has been asked, the answer to that is no, it's not a function of flexibility. It's a function of volume of use. That's how our solution is priced.
So an interesting question also, someone saying, hey, they're a new uniform factory. Where do your clients and others that you work with go to find these RFPs, RFQs, and tenders?
It's an excellent question. I won't give, and I actually thought about including a list of those types of
that could be a whole webinar.
Basically, their websites within the presentation. There are tons of sites. Every state or province usually has their own official site for all associated governmental and non-governmental organizations. All you need to do is Google RFPs and tenders, and you will get a whole list of sites. Most of these sites offer some access for free. but if you're going to be downloading RFP documents and responding, there's usually a membership fee. There's tons of them, and you should actively be signed up with as many of them as you can.
Yeah, excellent. The only other question I had worthy of another 15 seconds, and I don't see any others from the guests, is you showed that Gantt chart, which I bet has some really good information about what are the steps involved in that transition process and what's a good way to summarize that when pitching, when answering all these questions. If someone were to email you or reach out to you, do you have an example of that Gantt chart you could share with them, Len?
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Good.
I realize when you look at the video afterwards, it's still going to be tiny and you're not going to see the details of it, but sure.
Well, we really appreciate your insights today. Super helpful. I learned a lot. I hope that the visitors and the guests to this webinar did as well. We have recorded it. We will post it on YouTube. It'll likely be on qUniform's SimbolIQ's website link, and it'll be on the NAUMD.com website. And we thank you all for your attention and interest in this topic. Please watch for other great NAUMD webinars coming this year.